This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. I am your host, Razib Khan, and I don't normally introduce myself as the host, but this is a podcast, obviously, and I'm going to be annoying like podcast hosts are and ask you guys please to rate and review this podcast, please. And, you know, if you're on YouTube, hey, just subscribe, and like and all that stuff. I'm asking you this, and I don't want to seem lame and cheesy, but, I have noticed there's been a trail off of that sort of behavior. And it's obviously positive for me if you do that because you get, I get more traction on this podcast. And if I get traction on the podcast, I get traction on the Substack, razib.substack.com, as you know. And so, all of the content goes out there and the con cult grows a little bit more every day. So just help me out there and I will really appreciate it. Now, I am here today. Got to introduce the guest because that's actually the big deal. With my friend Nikolai Yakovenko, who you will recognize his voice if you listen to the podcast serially, which not everyone does. Some people subscribe or discover the archives, and then they actually go in reverse order. So some of you will listen to Nikolai first on this podcast, and then you will hear his earlier podcast later. And that earlier podcast was about Twitter. It's about like, I don't know, almost a month and a half now, about a month ago. And we made some predictions, and I like to keep these podcasts like kind of evergreen, but I guess these are a little bit more time sensitive. If you're listening to the podcast right now, that means hostile AGI has not destroyed the human race. We are still here. So I guess that's that. I'm just going to assume that that's not highly likely within the next couple of years. But setting that aside, his earlier podcast was about Twitter and what was going to happen with Twitter because certain Elon Musk, Lord Musk, took over, and Twitter's still up and running as I'm speaking. I'm recording right now, before Christmas. I'll say that before Christmas and after the 1st of December. Okay, so Twitter's made it, through some period of extensive layoffs, and then there's another tech story, a real tech story. I have to be honest, because the Twitter tech story is more about politics and culture. The real tech story is about the OpenAI chatbot, chat, the interface to GPT-3, where you ask GPT-3 questions and it responds. And since it's been opened up, millions of users have tried it out, I think in less than a week. And so a lot of my social media and my group chats have been dominated by responses from Chat GPT, and it's been pretty interesting. And so Nikolai worked in neural networks and artificial intelligence, so he's you know uh someone who can comment on these things, which I cannot. I am just like everyone out there, or most of you. And so I want to know what's going on here. Where are we going? Is this actually the technological revolution that some people are saying? It's obviously a big tech story. But first, Nikolai, let's talk about Twitter real quickly. The site's still up. I think Daniel Johnson of Ligma and Johnson was hired as a product manager. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. The purchase blue check wasn't, they're still waiting on that. Honestly, like, not too much has changed. A small minority of my followers have disappeared, and old accounts have reactivated. But on the margin, I actually still think it's pretty much the same old Twitter for me. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's about right. I think there were some changes for a while. Obviously, a lot of people left. It sounds like a few people joined, and for a while, a lot of microservices were down. The funny one that was obvious is at a certain point in the iOS app, it stopped showing how many notifications you have. So I, of course, assumed that this was a feature that they did this for our mental health, and I appreciated it. But that was not the case. Like the service that showed the number of notifications just died basically, and it took them 2 weeks to get it working again. So I think a lot of other services like that died. I think I heard about some translation services kind of just magically went away. Maybe they came back, maybe they didn't. So it does feel like they sort of stabilized and righted the ship. But I bet there's still things that sort of went away and are probably dead. And then they're like, it's not that important.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what I've heard at this moment, at this time, is uh, you know, it's going to be up and running for a while. The main issue is when they run up against some sort of crisis, and then they don't have the institutional knowledge in the house, and it could be somewhat of an issue. What do you think about that argument?
Yeah, I think that's broadly accurate. I mean, they are dealing with a crisis of advertisers, as Ben Thompson and others have reported on. Although maybe that's been alleviated also. I've noticed that Apple is back trying to sell me AirPods on Twitter. So whatever their, I guess they do believe in free speech, if you take Elon's phrase there. But I mean, I think a lot of advertisers have left. I mean, most probably won't come back in the short run. So that's the real issue. Product wise, yeah. I mean, I think until they have a crisis, or as the other thing I pointed out in the last podcast is it's really kind of great that they already implemented Twitter Spaces, which has really worked. I mean, it's buggy as hell as always, but it handled, 1 million users the other day. I forgot which space that was, but I think there was a million user space with Elon. So that's pretty impressive. And my guess is if they hadn't built that already, something like that would be really, really hard to get over the finish line.
All right, so we're here to talk though about GPT-3, and you know, I guess why it's a big deal is it's the first artificial intelligence that has really impressed people, but it's not. I mean, it's not like genius. I mean, there are certain things. So I enter in queries like, "What is heritability?" and it gives the right answer. It gives a good definition. But if I ask, "Is free speech in decline in the United States?" I actually just did that right now. And it says, as a language model, I do not have personal opinions or thoughts. My function is to generate text based on input I receive. I also do not have access to current events or information from the internet, so I'm unable to provide an answer to your question about the state of free speech in the United States. The concept of free speech is complex and can be interpreted in different ways, so it is difficult to make a definitive statement about its current state without considering a range of factors and perspectives. Candidly, I feel like that answer is kind of a bullshit answer. Like, it's bullshitting me. Like, it's kind of trying to sound smart, but it doesn't know anything. And so it should just say, I don't know anything about this. That's how it should have ended. But in any case, it does that a lot. But I've had friends that have made OpenAI or the GPT-3 engine behind this chat bot. I'll put a lot of interesting things. So, I guess can you talk in the high level? Where is it getting information if it's not getting information from the internet or something like that?
Sure. So, yeah, let me sort of explain it in two levels, because I think if we go into all the details right away, people will sort of get stuck. So, let me sort of say it in sort of two sentences first and then go a little bit deeper. So the remarkable thing is that this is GPT-3. They call it GPT 3.5, but it really is the sort of the soul of the model, so to speak, really is GPT-3 that was just like trained for a little bit longer, basically. But it's the same fundamental model. It's the same size. And what they did was that they tuned it through this two-step process to answer questions. Um, so specifically, it did sort of two things. One is that they fine-tuned it. We can sort of get into what that means, but basically they fine-tuned it on Q&A. So people actually answered questions themselves by hand. They paid a lot of people to answer a lot of questions. So then the model learned to sort of imitate that. That's part one. And then I think the much more interesting part is part two, where then they had the model generate a bunch of different answers. And humans, again, rated them from sort of like best to worst on the scale from 1 to 7. And then they had another model that was trained to sort of like internalize that human rating function and then to write things that do better on that human rating function. Does that make sense or not really?
Yeah, I mean, because there are ratings. So we're providing it data right now. It's evolving right now, right? So
Sort of. I mean,
yeah.
sort of. Not really. I mean, like it gives you thumbs up and thumbs down, but it's very noisy data. Most people don't click. I think they're gonna mine it for like more interesting signals, like when people. I mean, they really should have a share button. That would have been a much better signal, but I don't want to critique OpenAI because everything they've done is amazing. Like they're sort of getting signal from us. I think they're more like mining what are people interested in, and a lot of safety research. That's the other thing I should point out. It's kind of doesn't really matter, but when you get that specific prompt, was like I don't know and blah blah blah, like that's actually triggering a secondary system that is not actually GPT-3. That is a special system that tries to recognize things that it doesn't want to answer. So I've also seen friends get around that by asking the question in a different way or just bullying the AI and being like, no, like I'm not paying you to give me like nonsense. I'm paying you to answer the question kind of stuff. And then it's like, okay, and then it answers the question. So when you're getting those kind of answers, that's actually a secondary system, which is also mentioned in the OpenAI article. But that's why that sounds so weird.
Okay, so this is this an application of neural networks?
Yeah. So again, the core is still GPT-3, which is like at the core a very simple problem, very simple model, very simple task, which is that it takes it takes like a paragraph from the internet and tries to predict the next word, and that is literally all the GPT-3 trains to do. So it's a very simple, very general task, which it trained for a very long time on a big swathe of the internet. And that model, was released about 2 years ago. So then it's taking that core, it's sort of taking that brain that it learned from training on the internet and frankly a lot of nonsense. And now you're tuning it in again this two-step process to have it A, learn the format of answering questions, and then B, when it answers a question, to sort of give the kind of question that its raters would have given a higher rating to. That's all the reinforcement learning component really means.
And so, is it getting smarter?
It's a good question. I mean, I think Ben Thompson had a good post about this, a shorter and then a longer one. Sharp Tag, I'd highly recommend. I think a lot of your users are interested, your readers are interested, would enjoy this one longer conversation. Fundamentally, the answer is no. Fundamentally, it is not smart. What it's doing is it's a lot closer to the easiest analogy would be to Pavlov's dog, right? Is the dog getting smarter, right? Is clever Hans learning how to speak? The answer is no. Like we know this for sure. Um, and that is I'm not going to debate whether the machine is getting smarter or not, but that is effectively mechanically what is happening now. The model learns literally a reward and is like, if I write these words in this order, my masters, i.e., the humans rating these things would prefer these answers to these other answers. So it's not getting smarter, but what it goes to show is that a lot of answers can really be answered with two things. One is sort of just like imitating a certain structure, and two, kind of like doing like memory lookup, right? Like it's very easy to get things wrong, especially if you try. And it sounds like half of Twitter is being like, ha ha ha, I'm so cool. I can get GPT to give the wrong answer. But the truth is, if you just ask questions honestly, it gives a lot of good answers all the time. And it's kind of amazing because it's not querying the internet, right? The model is big enough to have internalized all of that freaking knowledge, and then to access it directly through Q&A, essentially. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, why isn't it querying the internet?
I mean, fundamentally, it just doesn't have to, right? So it actually took me like a few minutes to believe that it wasn't, because the answers were, at least to my pretty normal questions, like very accurate. Obviously, with the exception that yes, it was trained before 2021, so it has literally no information about the past 2 years. Um, I mean, but it's just if you think about it, what does querying the internet really mean? In a sense, it really means you are kind of like tapping into Google's database where it indexed the internet. Whereas what you're doing here, in fact, the task for the way you measure progress on the large language modeling on GPT-3's tasks is something like we literally call it compression, which is that you're really trying to compress all of these articles and you're trying to compress it into a model. So you take this information in and you're like, how well can I simulate that this word tends to go after that word, this word goes in this context. how well can I get to perfection where I can just sort of regurgitate everything. So in a sense, it's like this like very interesting way of compressing the internet. So if you think about it that way, then of course it doesn't have to. Kind of the way that, we compress our knowledge and our brain, however that works.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question, the question I'm having here is, it's all fun and games right now, but some people, I have a friend who's a statistician, and he was actually pretty impressed by the answers to problems that GPT-3 was giving. And then other people were talking about, oh, GPT-3 is a bullshitter. There's like a huge variance
Yeah.
of reactions here. Like, what is accounting for this? Is it what you just said? If you fuck around with it, apologize just for swearing. If you fuck around with it, it's gonna be like not so great. But if you interact with it in good faith, it can actually handle what you're asking.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think I kind of like Ben Thompson's phrasing on this, which is basically that it really is just predicting words and writing words and taking a lot of guesses. That's the whole probabilistic aspect of it. Like it's not crunching the numbers. Like a great example is if you give it a math problem, it doesn't actually solve the math problems the way Mathematica would or your calculator. It's like going to guess the answer. But, you know, it's surprising, but it's not surprising how often you can just guess the right answer over and over and over. Because if you think about it, right, like that's what we do. So chess is a great example. Like there's 12-year-old grandmasters in chess now. And in a sense, that sort of definitively proves that you can get really, really, really far with pattern matching. You don't need to solve for the position. Like people play 45-second chess. You're not thinking, you know? Same with math. I mean, when I did math competitions in my youth, a lot of the skill is guessing the answer. A lot of the times you're not really solving the problem. So, human language is like that. So it really is it is a bit of a parlor trick. I think that's very fair, but it's pretty surprising how well that trick works. And I don't think it's entirely a parlor trick, but I think there's some truth to that. Yeah, I think a lot of the code stuff where it's like, oh, find the bug here, fix this code, write me some code that works. Um, like that is not very robust, but it's kind of amazing how much you can just guess that sometimes.
I mean, so listening to you talk, I'm asking you, is GPT-3 smart? I want to ask, like, are we smart?
No, not really. I mean, mostly we're just, in autopilot and guessing, right? I mean, it's the whole Daniel Kahneman sort of what is it, type one, type two, however he described it, right?
Yeah,
Like
or
your
faster,
brain
or
is
faster, slow. Yeah, yeah.
fast or slow. That's right. Yeah. So the model is very much I think in whichever one is system one, system two. I don't remember which one, but it's definitely the fast system, and it's literally fast, right?
Oh, so you're saying that GPT-3, this chatbot, it's developing intuitions.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also remember, like, you know, those of us who operated in things like computer chess remember this, that like computers are amazing at chess. They're better than humans at this point, pretty definitively. But they think about chess very differently. And that's the same thing here. Like, I mean, we'll talk about it in a second, but the thing that I've been sort of obsessed with for years is, can an AI, write a pop song or a poem that's actually good? Doesn't isn't just like a poem-like object, but is actually good and fun and interesting. And I think it's still not there yet, but it's getting closer. But the point is, when it does so differently from a human, right? Like even if you're a very productive human, you can maybe write like 10 poems a day or 100. I mean, the AI can write 1 million poems in an hour. Um, so just in general, it uses power, like these sort of like very large memory, for example. So it can memorize the whole internet, whereas like Razib, even you can't. Well, maybe on genetics, maybe you can. You're probably as close as it gets. So
All
yeah,
right. Well, I mean, so I guess what you're saying here is, high level stylized fact is, the GPT-3 is kind of brute forcing it. It has some intuitions that it develops through brute force methods, and so I know, you're a computer scientist, but I mean, what are we doing? I mean, is it just kind of a mystery?
yeah. I don't really know what humans do, but I think I can talk a little bit to what the machine is doing. So because I did read sort of all the articles and all the background, and it kind of if you understand mechanically what it's doing, it helps explain some of the like kind of slightly annoying failure cases. And it makes you realize a lot of these are going to get fixed if someone wants to fix them. So, for example, you get something called mode collapse, where if I ask it to write a poem and then I'm like, nah, rewrite that poem. Like it struggles to rewrite the poem. Like the new poem I get is like a little bit different, but not very different. And actually, if you look at the poem, the beginning is going to be the same, but at some point it changes a word, then it changes more words as you go in deeper in. I mean, that is really just a structure of how it generates it, because remember, it's generating it like GPT-3, a word at a time, with this sort of like indirect reward where it's trying to guess, what is the kind of text generation that would please my master, so like the thing to remember is its reward function and the training for the reinforcement learning is like really, really simple. This is just something that OpenAI did for a few months, and this is kind of like their first attempt. So it's just the beginning. Like if you had to learn another reward function, if you said, hey, people like original stuff, so make it more original. Like maybe it's not going to be as good in the implicit 1 to 7 ratings, but make it more fun and more original and more different from stuff that's generated before. It can do that. It's extremely easy to do it. It's just not in the interface.
You read the papers, you know how it works, GPT-3. When it comes to something like nuclear weapons, my understanding is a lot of nations could do nuclear weapons. The real thing restraining nations is the supply of uranium. It's actually not the technology as much as just the physical inputs. I mean, is GPT-3, is this just the beginning? I mean, if there was a Butlerian jihad against thinking machines and people came after all of these computers and destroy them, could another nation, another research group just create their own GPT-3? Is it just a matter of time?
Oh, of course, and they already have. I think there's a couple versions of open source versions of GPT-3 that are already out there. There's a group called Luther AI, and one of their members created Stable-Diffusion, which of course, was the Dall-E imitator that is worth talking about. Actually, my former team at NVIDIA created a project called Megatron, which is a bigger, more open source, actually more efficient GPT-3 type model. They're also partnered with Microsoft. So Microsoft is powering both GPT-3 and sort of the other great giant model for my former team. And, that's still under development. I don't really know what they're doing with it, but they'll probably release something at some point. I don't know, and I'm not at liberty to say, but it's already happening. I mean, once you know how it works, um, you're absolutely right. Recreating it is like not a big deal. GPT-3 is a very large model. It has 175 billion parameters, but the Megatron model from NVIDIA and Microsoft already did a trillion parameter model, which is even bigger than that. So it can be done. It's going to be done. It's being done right now. It is not going to be quite as parameter efficient as the Dall-E type models. It turns out the Dall-E type models are even easier to imitate because they don't even need to be that big to be very, very cool. For text, you need a lot more parameters because you do kind of need to compress the knowledge of the internet. Um, Kind of misleadingly, right? Because it seems like the images are harder to make, but
Mm.
actually for the computer, they're easier to make for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But
All right. Okay. I'm gonna ask you about Dolly because I started doing Midjourney recently. For the listeners who subscribe to who read, who are capable of reading, I know that some of the people who subscribe to my Substack do so for the podcast. They don't have time to read, but they can listen to the podcast. Obviously, when they're doing stuff around the house or doing dishes, so I get it. But anyway, I am gonna start to use Midjourney. Actually, I already have done so for a post that's live on the Substack as we're recording this right now. So it should be live by the time this is, listenable. I've already used Midjourney to create visualizations. My editor had no idea that it wasn't a painting or a stylized retouched photograph for the post. So I think it's working. But it's not always easy. And I want to talk about that later. I want to go back to the GPT-3, these parameters, like these models, you know, these artificial intelligences, whatever, getting better and better. I come from a background, where I hung out in the Bay Area in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, 2010. I went to the Singularity Summit, plus or minus those 2 years, a fair amount. People like Ray Kurzweil talk about artificial general intelligence. The singularity is coming. Some people are scared of artificial general intelligence. Um, I honestly didn't pay much attention to it. And John McCarthy, was you a computer scientist? Know he was before he passed. But he told me, you know, 15, 20 years ago. Now, 20 years ago, it had to be 20 years ago because he was, had dementia by 2008. He wasn't worried about artificial general intelligence. As an outsider, I'm starting to get a little freaked out because, AI is. I mean, what even is AI? It's just a term we use. I mean, in some of my population clustering stuff, the consulting I've done, that's quote artificial intelligence. But obviously, I'm not terrified of it. I've been using it for over a decade, in terms of these max likelihood or Bayesian models, and exploring the parameter space with simulations and testing the models and all this stuff, the MCMCs and the convergences. But this is weird. This is having a conversation. Like, yes, it's a bullshitter. But I mean, I just been talking because I'm a little at a loss to know what's going on here, like where this is going to be 10 years from now. Yeah. So I mean, do you think artificial general intelligence is that a even coherent concept? Will it be able to? So I mean, computers can match us to chess and beat us at chess. Is someone going to be writing a 5,000 word Substack piece on the genetic history of the Ashkenazi Jews, someone as an artificial person, in a decade? Am I going to be redundant, Nikolai?
Well, you probably won't be, but I think, you know, a lot of the less sophisticated work people do absolutely will be, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Um, let's talk about Dall-E in a little bit, but I think because that one is just a lot easier to see what it can do and why that's useful. I mean, you sort of said it yourself, right? That um, you're using Midjourney, I was using Dall-E, and it already became instantly obvious that this is like a good way to illustrate, all of your blogs. Instead of having to find a picture to make a picture, if you could have the model generate, 100 pictures and choose the best one and tweak it, this is just sort of the way to go. So I think certain tasks are going to be like that. Is it going to write? Is it going to write Van Clousewitz's on war? Probably not. It doesn't have his experience. I mean, it's kind of a summarization engine at best. I think you can probably write pretty good ad copy and decent songs and poetry and jingles, but not yet. It's actually not good at it yet. But you can sort of see where it might be. I mean, even there, you're gonna, it's gonna be human guided, I think. But is it gonna do higher level tasks? I mean, I don't see it yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, not yet, but how far? I mean, we had GPT-2. It wasn't very good. Like, how far are we into the GPT-3 era? GPT-3 seems to be a leap forward. At least,
Well, GPT-4 is coming soon, right? So that's what they
is
say.
GPT-4 going to be the last GPT?
Probably not. I mean, look, I'll tell you this. So that's why I gotta say I've been very, very impressed, and I thought we would be much further away from generating something reasonably creative, um, like songs or poetry. Although I was kind of a little bit ready for it because I was surprised how creative the Dall-E was for images. In creating really truly new forms that are interesting and visually pleasing and surprising, right? So the fact that it can do that with text was not that surprising given we saw with images. I think another frontier I would like to see in that space would be if you trained it jointly. So the Dall-E is trained jointly with text and images. If you could train it jointly with text and sounds, like the waveform, then you could probably get it to, to say, okay, write me a lyrics for something that has the tune of Star Spangled Banner or something like that. Which right now it has no comprehension of what that means at all whatsoever, but it could. So I think we're going to see intermediate tasks like that get really good. People specialize on those. Um, but that's true with every tool, right? I mean, people talk about, when the spreadsheet came out, they're like, oh my God, this is going to replace my job. But it didn't, you just changed the nature of work. And then when people made live dashboards, that changed the nature of work. I mean, this is like a very boring, very old argument, but I mean, I do fundamentally see this is a new technology as opposed to some intelligent being, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, you're pretty. It sounds like you're pretty sanguine. Like, you don't think we're gonna be. Is basically I'm saying, like, Nikolai, like, are you scared?
No, I'm definitely not scared, but it's also I do think that this is just my opinion, that the sort of AI existential risk kind of stuff is just very sort of deeply seated in the Western, but especially the American psyche. I mean, it comes out of, kind of Northern European religion, in a sense, the flood myth and things like that. Um, and I think that's the case because this fear is completely not present in other cultures, like Japan, for example. Japan has a completely different view on AI and robotics, which you can see in their manga, which is that if you see anything, a great example is uh, shoot, what was that movie? I'm blanking on the name, but Alita, Battle Angel. That's a great example if you read that manga, which is a very good manga. A lot of these futuristic worlds are combinations of human and robot, and part human and part robot, and this is just very normal. So I think, to me, that single example sort of proves that this is something that is not inherent to the human condition to fear robotics and AI. It may be somewhat specific to our culture. So that's one thing. And then, of course, where this wraps in is people are afraid of the future. They are afraid of what are people with like relatively low cognitive skill going to be able to do as work gets automated, low level office work gets automated. And I think that's a very legitimate fear, but people sort of pin it on the technology. Whereas the real question is like, what are all we doing? Do our jobs have meaning? Maybe in a sense, people haven't really figured out how to live life well ever since people sort of got off the farm and out of the factory. I mean, most of us do jobs that make no sense. Well, I mean, that's saying that's the idea, right? And then they're just like pulling AI into this somehow.
So it sounds like, I mean, your position is be afraid of the jobs issue, but they're not going to abolish humanity. The AIs are not going to abolish humanity.
No, that's a flood myth. That's a flood myth. That's like we sinned and we deserve to be, exterminated in some way. I mean, that's a story that's older than the Bible, right? I mean, the flood myth, predates the Hebrew Bible. I mean, it's a very, very old myth.
All right. Okay. Which is, I mean, that's all good. In terms of, you obviously are pretty sanguine about. I mean, so you're imagining a future when the descendants of GPT, this new organism, this digital organism, will coexist with humans, with organic, thinking creatures, and will operate in some sort of complementarity, maybe.
Well, I think that's what we should aim for. So I don't think that this just happens automatically either. So, for example, there's certain technology out there that I don't think is particularly great. Things like TikTok. I don't think TikTok is entirely not benign. Maybe it has benefits. I'm not precluding that, but I think the negative externalities are, I think, pretty obvious to anyone. We don't know what the magnitude of that is, but not all new technology is great. I mean, you see many cultures that decide which technologies they adapt and which ones they reject. And I think that, to me, is going to happen. People are going to really start thinking, do we just go with this sort of technological determinism that we've sort of accepted, or do we just choose which technologies we have, which technologies we don't have, and sort of why? Um, do we limit them in some way? I mean, chess is a great example to me, anyway. Um, Chess has never been bigger. Chess has never been more popular. And through that whole time, for most of today's grandmasters, they weren't even born when the AI became better than humans. So there's a lot of concern about cheating. There's like, how do you work correctly with computers? But people haven't stopped playing chess exactly. But they just choose that, like, look, we are not going to use robots in our chess playing. We could, but we're going to choose not to. Like, no one wants to do that.
Yeah, and which is fine because they don't have the. I mean, they don't have rights. They're not persons. Can you see a point? I mean, look, I know some of these questions might be annoying, but these are the questions that people are having right now. Okay, we're all spooked.
Of
We're
course.
spooked by GPT-3. So do you think that the descendants of GPT-3, the GPT people, could be a thing in the next couple of decades?
I mean, I think GPT, 7, 8, whatever, is going to have a massive influence on our lives and how children learn and things like that. I think it's going to be present, but I don't see how that's a person in any way whatsoever. I mean, obviously, we anthropomorphize everything. I mean, if you look at our cars, right? they're designed to have a face. So I'm curious how that ends up working out. And and again, maybe just look towards Japan. Maybe they're living in the future because they've sort of been doing that for a while.
Well, I mean, I guess the issue that I wonder about is, okay, so you have GPT, like we're gonna stop talking about releases, and kids are gonna ask GPT questions all day. Siri is gonna be some primitive, you know, a tool from before the age of fire or something, and GPT could nudge humans in many ways.
Yeah, yeah,
These
totally.
programs, I'm hearing things about how they have certain priors. I guess okay, the racists are saying you can't make it answer racist questions, and the anti-racists are saying it's racist. What is the truth of GPT? Is GPT anti-racist or racist?
Well, neither, of course. I mean, it's a machine. It doesn't have feelings or motives. It's literally, well, not literally, but it's kind of closer to Pavlov's dog or Clever Hans, where it's trying to please, its master, and its master is getting its function from us. So it'll tell us whatever we want to hear. It's literally designed for that.
Okay, so it just depends on who is controlling, training. I mean, so who's running GPT-3? I mean, OpenAI, like, are there people there that are determining a lot of things about GPT?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, but it's again, it's sort of a two-part thing. So first, it crawls the internet, and obviously in a biased way, which it has to. I mean, random pages on the internet make no sense. So there's like some selection in terms of what it trains on the internet. That's GPT-3, and then this is a directed one where it was trained to give the outputs that are A, similar to the ones that humans wrote by hand, and then B, the ones that humans rated well. So, OpenAI, it's kind of funny, right? Because OpenAI designed that process, but they didn't ultimately make those decisions. They hired contractors to do it. So that can be done collectively or not.
Okay. All right. So, we've been talking about Dall-E, and I mentioned Midjourney. Okay, let's talk about Dall-E. Tell me what. Okay, I mean, a lot of people will know what Dall-E is. Um, Dall-E is a sick fuck. Okay. The stuff that I've seen Dall-E create is really disturbing. But anyway, I know that it's not Dall-E's fault. Tell the listener or the viewer, tell the listener actually, who Dall-E is, what Dall-E is.
Yeah, so Dall-E was the previous big AI model released from OpenAI, and that was kind of a culmination of a couple of years worth of effort to generate, i.e., I guess as we would say, draw, but to generate 2D images based on descriptions. So a couple of years ago, they had Dall-E 1.0, which wasn't very good, but it was still a big breakthrough. It was promising, where you would say things like, "I want an avocado chair. I want a chair in the shape of an avocado," and it would give you 10 examples of chairs that look like an avocado. But it's not like bad. It's a real chair design that looks like an avocado. So then they worked on that for another couple of years and made it much better, essentially. Um, the idea really is that it transforms. It's kind of cool how there's a stable what's the stable, just the diffusion type model, where it literally takes random noise, and it sort of tweaks the noise, tweaks the noise, tweaks the noise to be doing that for 100 steps, and that points it in the direction of the thing that you wrote. So you write text that gets turned into like an abstract space vector, and it just try to take a random image and transform it into something that is close to what you described. Um, Pretty cool trick, and yeah, now that's everywhere. Some people have gotten amazing results out of it. I have to give a shout out to Clara Silver, who makes amazing art with Dall-E. That's very human-like. In fact, I think that was one of the comments, was that she had a bunch of art at Art Basel, and a lot of that art in general, a lot of modern art is a bit soulless, and people pointed out how human her one piece was, even though it was created by an AI, but obviously with a lot of human guidance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and sometimes it's really weird. I'm gonna give you guys a concrete example. of what's going on when I use Midjourney, which is just a text prompt, and there's all sorts of parameters, but really, it's pretty simple. So I wanted to create a woman that was a Western hunter gatherer, and so I put in prompts like woman with dark skin and light blue eyes, and then it produces that woman. So I start out very simple. The woman is clearly African looking, and I'm not talking just the dark skin, the hair texture, and the lips, and everything. So okay, I will start to add parameters, but it's really hard um, to get a good output here so far. I'm probably not very skilled, but it just shows that some things are easy and some things are hard. If I put in thin lips, it ignores the dark skin part and makes her light skinned. What I want is a dark-skinned woman with who does not look African and has blue eyes and long dark hair in a beech forest. Something that would have happened 6, 7, 8,000 years ago when Western hunter-gatherers were meeting Anatolian farmers. But it's been really hard to create this individual. I probably will be able to, but I will need to tweak it. Why is this a problem? What's going on with the training set? I've heard that the earlier versions of Midjourney had difficulties creating human beings that were not of European origin.
Yeah, I mean, you hear that a lot. It's based on the training data. But beyond that, it's not even, how do I put this? Like, remember, it's taking your text and it's just turning it into a vector. So it's sort of on a high level jumbling all the words, making random associations, and then drawing things that it thinks is coherent that matches what you're saying. So you're absolutely right. When you say things like thin lips, it's gonna is going to affect your whole image essentially. Like it's not actually following your directions. Um, the way that GPT-3 is. GPT-3 is writing, things a word at a time. This is not really doing that. It's drawing the whole model holistically. So, kind of a classic example of that from computer vision is, um, in the much, much, much earlier version of text to image generation from 7 years ago or so, you would say, "Oh, draw me a picture of a giraffe," and it would draw the giraffe, like, and it would fill in the background with wherever giraffes live. But if you told it draw me a giraffe that's in a parking lot, it would ignore the parking lot part and still draw you a giraffe in the savannah in Africa, because that's what it's used to. So I think what you're describing is you want to give it pinpoint directions, but the model really compresses the whole thing that you're saying into like one vector. So that's why there's sort of prompt experts, like I said, like people like Claire Silver, the artist, who are able to get the model to do incredible things. But sometimes you end up doing kind of like Photoshoppy things. Like you're going to take a piece of the model that you like, you're going to say, okay, draw around it. So it's kind of like, think about it, you blank out the rest of the image, you just keep the lips, and it draws an image all around the lips. And then you're like, great, now just take this and draw me something similar. So what you're trying to do there is you're trying to sort of discover the vector um, in this roundabout way that actually gets you what you want. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, not everyone's taking linear algebra and stuff. Described linear algebra or like worked in R or some programming language, work with vectors and arrays. Tell the listener what a vector is, just so that they can kind of follow.
Yeah, I mean, a vector is very simple. So it's just an array of numbers. So say you have a vector that's 10 numbers, it's just 10 numbers. That's all that really means. So the idea is that you take all of your language, which has a lot of letters, a lot of words, it can go on for a pretty long time, and you're just compressing it into a fixed space. Sorry, that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but I can't do much better than that.
No. I mean, look, when people start at zero, something is better than nothing. So I just, I have a visualization. I think a lot of the listeners who've taken linear algebra or done some programming know
Yes.
intuitively kind of what you're saying when you say vector and vector spaces and all these other things, but a lot of normal people don't. One of the interesting one of the interesting things is using Midjourney isn't art. So it's weird because there's this artificial intelligence and it'll do all the art, and artists are now whatever. So I will just I might still actually commission. I might still commission things by human artists for various reasons, but I was actually gonna start to think about doing it very very soon. And Midjourney, I'm actually subscribing monthly to Midjourney because it's going to be way cheaper than an artist, and I think I can get 90 to 95% of the way there for the things that I would want commissioned. So it's already making an economic difference in terms of the labor inputs. Of course, at some point I'm going to get tired of inputting stuff. I don't like to do stuff like this. I like to write, I like to analyze data, I like to read papers, and I like to talk to people like you, Nikolai. I don't like to sit at a terminal trying to get a visualization to work out correctly because I'm not a graphic designer and I never wanted to be, and I'm not an artist. So at some point, what I would want to do is hire someone that can use these prompts really, really well, a prompt artist. So this is where we're at. I think this is what the future is going to be.
Yeah, you're going to hire a 15-year-old to do this, and in a sense, this is always kind of in a sense how things have worked. So if you remember the movie Ray about Ray Charles, um, there's this scene where the record guy comes to him and visits his apartment, talks about him, and he's a character. And the point is that, like, even in the world of music, you had people like that. I'm blanking on his name. You had people like David Geffen. These are people who had musical talent and musical ability and musical understanding, and they wrote their own songs a little bit, but they made a much bigger impact in music by being selectors, by choosing which artists are good, and then also working with the artists. They come in with a half-written song and tell them what's good about it and what needs to change about it to make it a hit. So in a sense, we've really always had this system, at least in creative, at least in music, very much so, where some people are really good at writing songs, some people are really good at like selecting parts, and now the writing is just kind of going to be done mostly by machines. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. So, I did say something earlier about Dall-E and Midjourney, and I've seen this too. It produced. So I think the one area where I can't. I think this is going to totally take over if it hasn't already, is science fiction art. Because science fiction art is art that is what the cognitive psychologists would call minimally counterintuitive. And I don't want to minimize the counterintuitive part, but you want to be able to like kind of understand and see and perceive what's happening, but there's some changes that make it salient and novel and interesting. And that's what science fiction art is. And with these Dall-E and Midjourney, like it's very very it's very good at doing that. Why is it good at doing that? Is it my hypothesis is it's good at doing that because it often just misses the mark enough to make it seem alien. Am I correct in that? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. And then also, but even if you wanted to code novelty into the system, which I think we kind of get with Dall-E without trying, and we don't get in GPT-3 without trying, and somebody should try it. I mean, you can code in novelty. You can reward the model for making something that's surprising, you know, making something that's different or original. It just like that's a bit you can flip in GPT-3 if you had access to the code. You can do that in 5 minutes. So like there's just in general that's like something you have to think about with machines. There's a lot of things that are easy for us but hard for them, and vice versa, right? So, for example, like I said before, generating 10,000 outputs is like would be hard even for you, Razib,
Yeah.
but it's really easy for a machine. On the other hand, certain kinds of coherence and connections may be easy for you and very hard for a machine. So novelty seeking is not hard for the machine at all, whatsoever. And it can be hard for us. I mean, those people are not very creative, right?
All right, yeah, that's true. So I gotta ask you, what do you think? So I'm not religious myself, Nikolai, and I don't get the sense you're the most religious person, but some religious people are starting to hypothesize that demons are being channeled through Dall-E because some of the art is satanic. Have you seen any of this, and what do you think of it? Like, I mean, just from an anthropological perspective, I mean, do you just chuckle, or are you worried that people are going to get the wrong idea?
Um, I don't think it's a crazy idea. I mean, I think there's demonic behavior that gets channeled through people all the time. I mean, you see it on Twitter, you see it in the real world. So, um, I don't know if it's channeling a demon exactly, but something that looks like that would not be hard to produce at all. I mean, it's a big part of modern art. I mean, a lot of modern art is explicitly very satanic, and it's obviously not that hard to make. So we're going to see a lot of that for sure. I mean, I think to sort of divert your question a bit, I think what this is going to encourage is more what we have already, which is that people are just going to get more and more of what they want. I mean, I think this precedes AI. Um, a good example of that is music, right? I forgot where I heard this, but a qualitative fact was 30 years ago, you would ask kids in America what their favorite band is, and about five bands would be on everyone's list. Maybe somebody will be, try to be difficult, right? And now you would get 30 answers. So we're just getting a more and more of a diffusion of content, of creators, of stuff, of opinions, and people are just going further and further into their own niches. And AI is going to certainly help create those. I mean, it's cheaper, like you said. Um, it's yeah. So I think people are just going to get back what they wanted in the first place.
Well, I do have to say, getting into this sort of AI art or AI image generation, because that's really, I mean, what I'm doing. I'm not an artist. Uh, there's all sorts of things that are not allowed, mostly of a sexual and violent nature. So it's really hard. For example, apparently, like I don't know for sure, but I tried to do an image of a Shantashta warrior shirtless, and it was just hard because it wouldn't let me do bare shoulders and stuff. I mean, there's ways you can do it, but um, what they're worried about is like pornography, basically porn and like sexual stuff and sexual violent stuff. Those are the inputs people would be putting unless they banned it. And I've heard Midjourney has no plans to prevent that sort of censorship because they don't want to deal with the liability of like just producing extremely obscene art.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two elements here. One is you can limit these models from the data they train on, right? So if you explicitly go out of your way to not train it on anything that people find objectionable, um, you are going to make it hard for the model to produce it, right? Um, and then obviously the other thing is these models clearly have classifiers that try to predict: are you asking for something objectionable? Is your picture generating something objectionable? There are data sets of objectionable content. Some of these data sets are like illegal to access without special permission, but there are models. For example, um, I think I mentioned on the last conversation that our team built these models for Twitter, right, to recognize different levels of nudity and violence, because there are definitely different levels to it. So these models exist and can be applied on the AI as well, but people are going to find a way around it. Although, going back to our previous point is, as a society, we can just decide we don't want this. We really don't want machine learning models to create or be trained in a certain kind of content. Um, and I wouldn't necessarily assume that just that somebody will make it. I mean, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but people could just decide not to do it, right?
Yeah, they could. But I think from our previous conversation, it's pretty obvious that other cultures have other values. So I think we know what's going to happen in Japan in light of the precedents in relation to their manga and anime, in terms of some of the directions that it takes. But so as we close out. You're a computer scientist. You worked in artificial intelligence. I get a sense from you that this has proceeded a little faster than you had expected. Is that true? And if it is true, how many years ahead of schedule are we really? Were you expecting this in 2028? I don't know. From my perspective, it kind of hit me like a wall, like a brick wall, because I've had friends talking about artificial intelligence, I don't know, since the mid 2000s incessantly. and it's one of those things just never really gets into prime time outside of some specialized tasks and roles. Uh, and it's been like that for decades. Just like robotics, the robot maid. Although a lot of people now have Roombas, but in any case, now artificial intelligence with OpenAI and stuff like that, it's all over the place. Now it's not super actionable in my opinion, but it's going to change really soon. I think it's going to have a big effect on our lives. I've already given a few marginal examples, but they're not trivial. Tell us where we are in terms of what you had expected, and why were you surprised, or why were you not surprised? What did you know? Just I'm giving, like, this is very open ended here, but I want to know because I don't know this field at all.
Totally. Yeah. So I've been in this space for a while. Like I mentioned, generating text, making an image of a giraffe or any other description. Like we had very primitive sort of proof of concepts for this years ago. And my personal perspective is I'm 0% surprised we got here. Um, this year has been a giant step forward, no question. Having said that, in the 3 year, 4 years prior, I personally was surprised we were not making as much progress. So, for example, the models were getting bigger for text, but no one was really using them. Ben Thompson argues that it's a human interface, and that the Chat GPT-3, just sort of found a good interface for for the GPT-3 model. I think that's like half true. I think also, you know, this reinforcement learning thing really did make a difference and get things in the format people wanted. But either way, that's kind of the way I would see it. I would see it as kind of a classic curve where, people were ahead of it and then we were too early. I mean, I'm the kind of person who wanted, was thinking about, hey, can we build a company? Can we build these applications, 4 or 5 years ago? And clearly would have been way too early. We would have been, sitting in our hands for 3 years, right? So I think this is like a very, very common trend in technology. People sort of discover it, they're early, they get super excited, and then there's a bit of a disillusionment where it's not working out for a couple of years, we're moving forward, but too slowly, and then you just have this massive rush forward. One example of this would be the jet engine that's often used. The jet engine sort of existed in the 40s, but wasn't really a part of World War II. Like it wasn't a real thing. And then after the war, I mean, in the late 40s and the 50s, the jet engine just like exploded. Like it went from it wasn't really a thing. So we had you know trans American, transatlantic, aviation, in a short window. Every year or two, the engine was improving by like noticeable amounts. And then now, since the 60s, the jet engine hasn't improved very much. So I think now that we're in it, it's like very obvious that we're in that stage of improvement where every 2 months, every few months, something big and important happens. This is why this is like by far the hottest area in VC right now, in venture capital, as it should be. These models are improving, by the week, by the month. New applications are becoming obvious now that we know how a few things work. Um, and it's going to be a bit of a race, who will be the first people to apply it. Obviously GPT-3 doesn't answer question about the news. Pretty obvious that it would be nice if it did, things like that, right? And then, we're going to know it, maybe this sort of gold rush lasts a couple of years, maybe it lasts 10 years, maybe it slows down after a few years. We'll see. I definitely, on the creativity side, I've been blown away by first how Dall-E and this gives us stuff that seems creative and interesting to people. I would have thought that would take several more years, but I don't think anyone really in our space ever doubted we get to this point. So, sorry to pour cold water, but I'm not really sure that you know this is really that transformative to those of us who've been paying attention. Now, on the other hand, the singularity, people talking about AI, I mean, that's a completely different universe. I'm not going to say anything bad about that group, but their views tend to be kind of pretty disconnected from actual developments. So maybe they're right by accident, maybe they're wrong. I don't really know. I'm not sure I really care, to be quite honest.
All right. No, it's a good perspective. I feel like I'm a little bit calmer um than I was at the beginning of this episode. Now, I'm not saying that I was freaking out. This is not February 1st of 2020 when I was early on the COVID bandwagon and I was pretty freaked out and nobody else was. I feel like I'm just going along with the flow of moderate bubbling freaking out, like what's going on here, and you're reassuring us that um, they can do some of the things we can do well, but not everything. Maybe not the important things. Who knows? So there's
Yeah, we
hope
got
for
to ride the
humanity.
tiger. We got to surf the wave, ride the tiger. That's definitely my take. It's happening. It's fun. Let's enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. And with that, I will let you enjoy the rest of your day, Nikolai. It was great talking to you. This is going to be I've had a couple of return guests within short span, and I hope that. I guess I'm hoping that maybe in 3 months I'm not going to call you up and be like, "Hey, we need to talk about GPT Infinity after GPT-3 invented its own ability to design AIs, and then when iterated and accelerated, right? I'm assuming that that's crazy from what you're saying, but so I will not be talking to you about that in 3 months.
I don't think so, but I would not be surprised if GPT-4, can write like pretty amusing songs and limericks and things like that, which right now it really can't.
Well, that's really good because there's a fair amount of quantitative evidence that mainstream music, even though there's a lot of niche music that people are interested in, and a lot of bands that are mid to lower, in the scale, we have not had a major genre shift in the United States since pretty much the mid to late '90s, and this is the longest time that has actually occurred. Apparently, since popular mainstream music through phonographs became a thing. And a lot of people say like, oh, it could be the internet and other things, just the fracturing of the common culture. But maybe if GPT-4 is just a really good lyricist, it will capture our culture's attention and bring everyone back together to one genre at least somewhat of the time. So that's a weird speculation, but I'm going to end with that.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All right. Thank you, Nikolai.
Thank you, Razib.
This podcast for kids